On our 40th anniversary, he said it right over lukewarm casserole and the hum of the fridge. I regret marrying you. Name's Grace, 62, part-time church librarian, full-time expert in swallowing silence. There's a blue leather diary in my nightstand. Would you have opened it? After 4 decades together, she said it so quietly, I almost missed it. I regret marrying you. The sentence arrived not like thunder, but like a window slowly closing. Grace didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She didn't even look at me when she said it. Her fork lay still beside her plate of cooling tuna noodle casserole steam, curling away like something leaving us. I glanced up from the HOA newsletter in my hand, expecting some offhand comment about Rusty's arthritis or the dishwasher's moaning, but all I caught was that one line, simple, subdued, and surgical. I froze. My first instinct was to ask if I heard her right, but something about the set of her jaw told me I had. So instead I nodded faintly, set down the newsletter, and tried to swallow the lump in my throat without betraying it was there. The room was quiet except for the soft clink of Rusty's water bowl in the corner. He had long ago given up the pretense of joining us at the dinner table, preferring instead to settle in the drafty patch beneath the radiator. The casserole sat half-eaten between us. Grace didn't touch hers after the sentence. I foolishly ate 2 more bites, chewing without tasting, trying to rewind the evening in my head. Had she been quiet at dinner? Yes. But lately quiet was our native language. She'd hummed a hymn absently while setting the table, placed the napkin to my left, as always even warmed the rolls like she used to. And yet now that sentence. Later that night, I lay in the guest room for the first time in our 41 years of marriage. The sheets smelled like cedar and faint dust. The mattress was too firm. I stared at the ceiling, listening for Grace's footsteps. Nothing. I tried to recall the last time she kissed me goodnight. I couldn't. I tried to remember if the card on the kitchen counter, the one for my 64th birthday, had been signed. I got up, padded back to the kitchen barefoot, and checked it hadn't. I didn't cry. I didn't knock on her door. I simply stood there in the glow of the fridge light, the card in my hand, and thought about all the years that led to this one. The dinners, the car rides, the vacations with too much sun and not enough patience. I thought about our boys grown and gone. I thought about Rusty and the Christmas morning he peed on the tree skirt, and we both laughed until we cried. Where had that laughter gone? Back in the guest room, I pulled out my old laptop from the drawer. It took forever to boot. The screen blinked and hummed like a relic resisting resurrection, but eventually it lit up dim and blue. I opened a blank document and, without fully knowing why, typed at the top, "Things I missed." The blinking cursor stared at me like a dare. I couldn't write yet, not then. But I knew I would. The next morning, Grace had already left for the church library shift by the time I came downstairs. The casserole was still on the counter, covered with plastic wrap. Rusty wagged his tail half-heartedly, his cloudy eyes following me as I made coffee. I poured a cup, burned my tongue, and turned my gaze to the basement door. There's a habit you develop as an auditor. You store everything. Not because you need it, but because one day someone might. Tax returns from 1998, phone bills, birthday cards, every note the boys ever wrote. Our basement was an archive of forgotten truths. I walked down slowly, the steps creaking in protest. The air grew colder. At the far end, beneath the old workbench, I noticed a box I hadn't touched in years. It was sealed with brittle brown tape, yellowing at the corners. On the top, written in Grace's script, 1992-2001, I bent down, placed a hand on the box, and just stood there. My breath clouded in the chill. I didn't open it, not yet. But I could feel the weight inside, not just paper, but something heavier. Marriage doesn't shatter like glass. It erodes like stone in wind, slow and silent. And sometimes the cracks aren't visible until you're already standing in the rubble. The box wasn't dusty, it had been moved recently. I stood there in the basement, barefoot on the cold concrete, the morning light slanting through a narrow window like an interrogation lamp. The box sat behind a stack of holiday wreaths and tangled extension cords, but something about the way the edges lined up too neatly made me think this was placed here, not forgotten. I dragged it out and wiped my hands on my old company hoodie. The cardboard was still firm, the lid crisp, and when I lifted it, a faint whiff of lemon cleaner mixed with old paper, met my nose. My breath hitched. Inside were several worn notebooks, their spines curled, some rubber banded together. On top lay one labeled in Grace's tight slanted script, "The Blue Years." I didn't know what that meant. Blue like sad, or blue like calm seas. I ran a calloused finger over her writing. The indentation of the pen still showed through the page like a scar. Rusty's nails clicked above me. He must have sensed I was gone from bed. I sat cross-legged beside the furnace and opened the first page. The smell of ink and time rose up like incense. July 14th, 1986. Ephraim held my hand through the whole ferry ride. He didn't even notice how cold the wind was. He just kept smiling like we were the only ones on Earth. I remembered that ferry. It had rained the entire week on our honeymoon. I told her it was romantic. She'd laughed and said wet sandwiches weren't romantic, but I held her hand anyway. I read the next few entries in silence. Grace wrote about simple things, how I trimmed my beard to impress her mother, how we painted the guest room pale yellow, how I once brought her a peach Danish without being asked. Then I turned to an entry from October 1991. Her handwriting had stiffened. Waited alone again. Dr. Lieberman said it might not be viable. I told him you were stuck at work, but he didn't ask. No one asks anymore. My chest tightened. I remembered that week vaguely, an audit deadline, a late-night pizza I ate alone in my cubicle. I hadn't known she'd gone to the doctor alone. Or maybe I had, and I'd let the urgency of spreadsheets override it. I rubbed my eyes. God, I muttered. Grace. By the third notebook, my back ached from sitting, but I couldn't stop. Her voice, her younger self, echoed in my ears. She had always been gentle in person, but in these pages she burned. There was a fire I'd never noticed or never made space for. I reached the end of one notebook, a faint water stain, blurring the last lines. I squinted, holding it up to the light. If I disappeared, would he even notice I let the diary fall into my lap? My hands trembled as I pulled it against my chest, like pressing it close might reverse time. I didn't know, I whispered. Over and over. The heater kicked on beside me, the pipes groaning like old bones. Rusty whimpered from the top of the stairs. I looked back into the box. Beneath the notebooks, there were a few photo envelopes. I pulled one out. In the top photo, we were at a church retreat in '95. I wore a windbreaker. Grace stood beside me, half turned away from the camera, her face caught in shadow. I'd never noticed that before. The box wasn't dusty. It had been moved, recently. Judy didn't ask why I showed up at 8:15 a.m. She just poured me black coffee. No cream, no sugar, no questions. The mug was thick-chipped at the handle and probably older than my youngest niece. I wrapped my hands around it like a man freezing from the inside out. The Hillview Diner hadn't changed since the '90s menu, still laminated with yellowing tape booths, patched with duct tape under the table, and Bev still forgot cream every other Tuesday. She forgot it again today. You sure you don't want eggs? She asked out of habit. Just the coffee, thanks. My voice came out hoarse, like I hadn't used it since yesterday. Maybe I hadn't. Judy's eyes studied me, not unkindly. She folded her napkin once, then again, then a third time into a triangle so crisp it could slice air. The gesture was small, but precise, like her whole life. You look like hell, she said plainly. I feel worse, I replied. Outside, rain tapped on the window in that hypnotic way that makes you forget where you are. There was a tree just beyond the parking lot, its last few amber leaves clinging to bare branches like old promises. I watched them shake. I read part of it, I said after a long sip. The notebook. Judy didn't flinch. Her spoon circled her cup with slow, even strokes, though she wasn't stirring anything. Which one? The one labeled "The Blue Years." I paused. There was a passage about our honeymoon. She remembered the way I smiled at her, said it made her feel safe. She always liked your smile, Judy murmured. I didn't know that. She told me. Silence fell between us. Not awkward, but layered. The kind of silence that forms only when two people have known each other too long to need constant words. When did she start regretting me? I asked, not lifting my eyes from the scratches on the tabletop. Do you know, Judy took her time answering. She always did. Grace went on a retreat in 2003, Women's Weekend, Lake Geneva. I frowned. She said it was a church conference. It was both. Church during the day, writing in the evenings, journaling mostly. I looked up. That's when she started the diary. That's when she started writing again. Judy folded the napkin again, then laid it down with care, said it helped her think clearly. I remembered that weekend. I'd been handling a late audit, some messy report for a municipal client. I'd eaten takeout 3 nights in a row and slept on the recliner. I hadn't even noticed she was gone that long. She changed when she came back. Judy continued. Not cold, just quieter, like someone had whispered a question into her ear that never stopped echoing. I said nothing. The coffee tasted burnt, but I kept drinking. She stopped wearing her ring last fall, Judy added gently. My fingers twitched. I looked down at my hands' calloused, worn fingernails trimmed by routine, more than care. She said it snagged sweaters. Judy didn't reply. The look in her eyes said more than any sentence could. Bev brought a plate of toast we didn't order, left it without comment. Judy stared at it for a moment, then used it to wipe butter into patterns on her plate. I didn't notice, I admitted. I don't think I've noticed much at all. She never wanted grand gestures, Ephraim. You know that. Judy reached into her purse, pulled out a photo in a paper sleeve. But she did want to be seen. I took the photo with hands I hoped didn't shake. It was us, Judy, Grace, and me, sitting on a church picnic bench in 1993. Grace held a notepad, sunlight catching her hair just right. I had my arm around them both, smiling too wide. Judy looked the same as always, amused, slightly skeptical, and sharper than she let on. That was the year she submitted her first devotional piece, Judy said. To the church bulletin. I never read it. You were working weekends. I pressed the photo back into the sleeve, then held it between both palms. It felt heavier than its paperweight. She's still right, Judy nodded. Sometimes. Late at night, mostly in the den. I go to bed early, she smiled. Not unkindly. Just sad. I know. We sat like that for a while, just 2 older people and a ghost sitting between us, sipping burnt coffee and watching rain turn from taps to streaks on the glass. You can't fix 40 years in one act, Judy said eventually, but you can start with one silence. The napkin was folded once more now, a small, compact square tucked under her saucer. There's a writing workshop next Saturday, at the church. She'd never want me there. She won't be, Judy said softly, but I will. I studied her, the way her scarf matched her earrings, the way her hand stayed on her cup but didn't lift it again. She meant it. She always meant it. She said something in the notebook, I whispered. A line. If I disappeared, would he even notice? Judy blinked slowly. You're noticing now. I looked out the window. The last leaf fell. She called me dependable, I said more to myself than her. But maybe dependable can be another kind of absence. Judy stood. She touched my shoulder on the way out, not firm, not fleeting. The diary won't break you, Ephraim. Ignoring it might. Then she was gone. And suddenly I wasn't sure if I came for answers or permission to ask the right questions. I opened the next notebook with shaking hands. This one had water damage. The cover, once pale blue, was puckered like old skin left too long in the bath. I traced the warped edge with my thumb, hesitant. The pages clung to one another, reluctant to reveal anything quickly. When I pried the first 2 apart, a pressed flower slipped out and floated to the desk. It landed like a sigh, brittle yellowed. The center almost turned to dust. Dandelion. Grace used to call them sun scraps when we were younger. A cold shaft of October light crept through the blinds. The jazz record I'd forgotten to flip hummed a single stuck note like a heartbeat gone wrong. I sat in my old leather desk chair, the one that squeaked when I leaned back too far. It didn't squeak today. Nothing did. Even Rusty was asleep under the window, twitching in his dreams. I began to read. June 2000, Ephraim's working late again. Our anniversary. I made the table for 2 anyway. Roasted lamb candles. I drank the wine alone, listened to Ella Fitzgerald, pretended he'd be home by dessert. He wasn't. October 2001, church fundraiser. Ephraim said he'd come this time. I wore the blue dress, the one he said made my eyes look like lake water. He forgot. I ate cake alone. People asked, I smiled. He got tied up with quarterly reports, I said. No one questioned it. February 2003. Snow fell all day. I shoveled the driveway. My back hurt. Ephraim had a conference call. I watched him through the window. He never saw me. I closed the notebook for a moment, pressed the heel of my hand to my eyes. The flower on the desk looked like it might blow apart if I breathed too hard. I held my breath. The kitchen called to me not with comfort, but with necessity. I needed coffee, something hot to keep me from turning to stone. I shuffled in feet, heavy steps creaking against the floorboards. The house smelled faintly of lemon oil and yesterday's toast. On the shelf above the sink sat the mug. The mug, white ceramic with a gold rim, faint blue script, to 25 years. Grace gave it to me our silver anniversary tucked inside a bakery box, with 2 slices of carrot cake. I hadn't thought of it in years. I pulled it down. A crack ran from the rim halfway to the base, a lightning bolt down the face of time. I almost dropped it. Instead, I set it gently on the counter, then opened the drawer where we kept random tools and glue sticks. In the back, under expired batteries and a warped tape measure, I found the epoxy. It was labeled Gold Fill. I remembered Grace using it once to fix a chipped vase. I'd rolled my eyes back then. Now it felt sacred. I read the instructions twice. Then again, my hands trembled as I mixed the resin, watching the gold shimmer coil through clear paste. I applied it with the tip of a toothpick, following the cracks slowly, reverently, like tracing a wound with healing intent. The mug was warm from my grip. The glue smelled faintly like almonds and something medicinal. I held it together for the full 2 minutes, fingers aching. When I let go, the crack was still visible, but it gleamed. Grace appeared briefly, then her shoes soft against the hardwood. She was dressed for church, wearing her gray coat with the black buttons, her hair twisted into a neat bun. She didn't look at me, didn't say a word, just reached for her keys, hesitated, then left. The door clicked shut like punctuation on an unfinished sentence. I returned to the study. Rusty raised his head, then dropped it again. I picked up the notebook. The next entry began with a line that made my throat tighten. There is no villain in our story, only absence. I stared at the sentence so long the letters blurred. In the background, the jazz record finally slipped to silence. The flower still lay on the desk, untouched, as if waiting to be remembered. Grace didn't come home that night, and she didn't leave a note either. I woke to silence, the kind so thick it makes your ears ring. The red digits on the alarm clock flashed 6:23 a.m., blinking like a warning. I hadn't heard it go off. I reached across the bed instinctively, but her side was untouched. The sheets still held the gentle shape of the way she folded them each morning. My hand hovered there a moment, then fell to the mattress. The house felt different. Not empty exactly, but paused like something was waiting to restart. I wandered down the stairs in my robe and slippers, stepping over Rusty's chew toy, which hadn't moved in days. The motion sensor light in the living room didn't click on, burnt out. I stood there in the dimness, the walls looming like unfamiliar neighbors. Coffee didn't taste right. Maybe it was the cream, maybe it was me. I sipped anyway and stared at the blinking red light on the answering machine. It had blinked for over a year. A silent metronome of guilt and forgetfulness. I'd never played it, until now. The click was louder than I expected. Hi, Ephraim. I know you're probably still at the office. Or maybe just busy. Her voice filled the kitchen like morning fog. There's this writing workshop next Saturday. Judy signed me up, but I'd really love if you came too. No pressure, just maybe be there, click. I stood still, mug cooling in my hand, cream swirling like a storm. That was last year. I remembered that weekend I'd gone to an alumni dinner. I told her it was networking. She'd smiled, kissed my cheek, and said nothing more. I picked up the phone and stared at it. Dialed Judy's number, hesitated on the last digit, then hit call. Judy speaking. Hey, I croaked. Morning. A pause. Morning, Ephraim. I wanted to ask. Is she there? Did she call you? But the words wouldn't come. I swallowed instead. I just wanted to say thanks, I muttered. For the other day. "You're welcome," she said softly, not pushing. "You okay?" I looked out the window. The wind nudged the empty bird feeder. "Just a quiet morning," I said. After we hung up, I grabbed my coat and headed outside. The park was only 4 blocks away, and the air bit at my cheeks as I walked. It was Monday, early December. A thin frost coated the grass. I sat on a wooden bench near the pond, hands buried in my pockets. Years ago, I'd found Grace here crying on this very bench. I asked if she was okay, and she said something about a sad film. I had nodded, relieved not to ask more. Now I wasn't so sure. Maybe the movie was just a shield. The ducks didn't show today, just a quiet wind and the chime of metal tags on a jogger's dog. I sat there for nearly an hour, trying to remember the last time I'd asked Grace how she was. Not how was work or did you pay the bill, but how she really was. I couldn't remember. Back home, I moved through the rooms like a ghost. Every door creaked. The guest room bed was still rumpled from the night before. On my desk, the box waited. The next notebook was thinner, pale green, its edges curled like old parchment. I opened it. Pages fell open to 1997. May 1997. I lost it. Again. I didn't even tell him this time. What would be the point? His firm needed him that week. I let it go quietly. Lit a candle in the church, didn't even cry. I'm getting good at not crying. I sat down slowly. My knees creaked louder than the chair. I didn't know about a second baby. We never spoke of trying again after 91. I thought the silence meant she'd moved on. Maybe it meant she couldn't say it aloud anymore. The words blurred. I pressed my palms to my eyes until stars bloomed in the dark. Then without warning it came. A sob so jagged it startled Rusty awake. My shoulders shook. I bent forward, elbows on knees, hands over my face, and wept. For Grace, for the child I never knew, for every missed moment I'd paved over with duty, for myself. The tears came in waves. Decades of silence breaking loose. I don't know how long I stayed there, only that eventually I felt empty in a way that was clean. Later I walked into the kitchen to get a glass of water. The clock on the oven blinked 1:47 a.m. Must have been a power surge. I opened my laptop out of habit. One new email from Grace Lattimore. Sent 1:34 a.m. Subject none body. Don't worry, I just needed to breathe. I stared at the screen. Somewhere in the house the wind chime rang softly. And there was no wind. It was still early when I left the house. The sky looked like bruised cotton, dense and dull. I hadn't slept. Instead, I sat in the armchair with her final notebook open on my lap, and the reheated coffee from yesterday cooling beside me. The last entries weren't dated. Just place names, sketches of church windows, quotes from people I didn't recognize. Then I turned a page and found the sentence underlined twice. I hope he never reads this, and I hope he does. My breath caught. I stared at the line as if it might vanish. She had wanted me to see it, and feared I might. I drove to the church library with no real plan, just a quiet pull inside my chest, like the tug of a thread long buried. The parking lot was empty, save for a gardener loading leaves into paper sacks. The main doors creaked when I pushed them open, letting in a breath of wind that smelled faintly of cinnamon and rain. Inside the library felt warmer than I remembered. Smaller, too. The fluorescent lights buzzed like a soft, persistent memory. A few plastic bins were stacked near the desk. I didn't see her. Pastor Neil walked by with a cart of hymnals. He paused. "Ephraim, you all right?" I tried to nod. Just looking for Grace. "She took the morning off," he said gently. "You can sit in her spot if you want. She likes the east window." I thanked him and walked slowly toward the small table near the window. A photograph sat on the corner, Grace, me, and Rusty, taken years ago. We were younger, her hair catching sunlight. I picked it up. The frame was chipped, but her eyes those I could still recognize. I set the photo down too fast. The edge of my sleeve caught my coffee mug. It spun, wobbled, and fell. The crash wasn't loud, but final, a clean fracture. I stood frozen, watching the liquid pool across the desk, drip down the side like sap from a wounded tree. And then everything tilted. Not just the mug, not just the photo, but the room itself. My knees gave first, then my grip on the chair. I felt a deep pull from within, not pain exactly, but a hollowing. The breath left me. I didn't fall all at once. I folded like Judy's napkin once, then again. Someone shouted, "The librarian." I could hear her voice but couldn't lift my head. I remember the beeping of machines, the fluorescent lights above me growing sharper. I was in the ambulance, the straps snug across my chest. Cold air from a small vent above stung my cheeks. The EMT was asking something I couldn't quite grasp. I closed my eyes. Tell her I whispered. I finally heard her. I don't know if he heard me. Maybe it didn't matter. When I woke in the hallway of the hospital hours later, the ceiling was off-white and too high. My mouth tasted like metal. I shifted slightly. A shape moved in the corner of my eye. Grace sat across from me, her purse in her lap, shoulders slightly slumped but composed. She didn't look at me. Not yet. Her hands clutched a manila envelope overstuffed, nearly torn. On top I saw a title I knew by now, The Blue Years. Copy. She had made a copy, brought it, but hadn't handed it over, not yet. And maybe that was the beginning of something. The hospital ceiling was off-white, speckled, like the inside of a conch shell. I blinked twice, then winced as the fluorescent light buzzed somewhere above. My throat tasted like copper, and my wrist had one of those paper bands I always joked about avoiding. Then I saw it. Not the nurse, not the IV pole or my half-folded gown. I saw her, Grace. She sat in the beige vinyl chair beneath the window. The rain traced tiny veins across the glass, and a faint draft made the curtain flutter just enough to let in the scent of wet pine mulch from the garden below. She didn't look up. She didn't hold my hand, but she was there. On the bedside tray was a paper cup. Coffee. Fresh, I guess, thin steam rising in lazy spirals. A napkin rested beneath it, carefully folded in half. Then again, just like Judy used to do, I tried to speak, but my voice sounded like a drawer opening with rusted hinges. "How long have I—" She interrupted gently. "Since early this morning. You passed out. Mild concussion, the doctor said. Low blood sugar, too." I swallowed. My lips felt dry. "And you stayed." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stood, walked to the window, pulled the curtain back another inch. The rainlight spilled across the floor, catching in the crease between her shoes and my bed. "I read it all," I said finally. She turned only slightly, her profile sharp against the rainy haze beyond the window. "What did you feel?" That was all she asked. Not what I thought, not whether I disagreed. Just what I felt. I searched for something honest, like I'd been sleepwalking through a house full of lit candles, and never noticed the fire until now. She didn't respond, but she sat back down. "I missed our son's first choir solo." I continued, "I forgot our anniversary twice. I never noticed when you stopped wearing the ring." Grace looked at her hands. "And all that time I said I thought I was the good one, the stable one." The rain thudded harder. I could smell her lotion lavender, the same one she'd used since the 90s. "I'm not asking to be forgiven," I said. "I'm just asking to be present for whatever comes next." Her eyes met mine then, not with tears, but with something harder, older, weathered. She reached into her tote bag, not the old floral one, this was new, gray canvas monogrammed. She pulled out a small notebook and set it beside the coffee. Then she stood. The notebook was navy with a soft leather cover, a pen clipped to its spine. She didn't say much. Just, "For the next 40, if you mean it." Then she turned and left the room. The scent of rain swirled in behind her. I picked up the notebook. My name was written on the inside cover in her handwriting. Still steady, still Grace. I opened to the first page. 7 words, neat and centered. "Let's begin with Thursday dinners. Your turn." I smiled. Not wide, not for the nurses or the monitors or the beeping machines. Just for myself, and maybe, just maybe, for her. 6 months later, I stood beside Grace and taught my first workshop on how to truly listen. The epoxy-glued coffee mug sat quietly at the registration table, catching afternoon light on the gold vein running across its side. A woman in a lavender sweater gently set down a pen next to it, pausing as if to ask permission to touch something sacred. No one mentioned it. No one had to. The community hall of St. Bellamy was warmer than usual for an April morning. Someone had brought lemon pound cake. The scent mixed with copier toner and tulip pollen drifting in from an open window. I glanced at Grace beside me. She wore the same navy cardigan she always did on Thursdays. It had survived Potluck's hospital waiting rooms, and now this. We had 12 attendees. 11 if you didn't count the young man with the portable recorder who said he was just observing. The rest were couples, some married 50 years, others navigating second starts. They carried tote bags, hesitant smiles, and decades of stories unsaid. I cleared my throat. Welcome, I began, to a space where quiet isn't awkward and honesty doesn't require a thesis. Grace smirked slightly at that. It was our rhythm now. I opened, she deepened. She stepped forward and held up a faded page. This, she said, is the first line of the first diary I ever wrote after our honeymoon. I wrote it on the flight back while Ephraim was asleep beside me. She read today. I learned how someone can feel so close and yet be on the other side of the world. Silence. Then someone sniffled in the third row. I picked up from there. Our first exercise today is simple. Write one thing you never said. Just one. To anyone. It doesn't have to be dramatic. Just true. Pens scratched. Pages turned. A woman with silver hair and strong hands wrote furiously. Paused, then underlined something twice. A man in plaid sat motionless for a full minute before finally exhaling and beginning to write. We circulated slowly between tables. No critiquing, no correcting, just presence. About 30 minutes and a soft sound broke the hush. A whimper, not loud, not showy, just a woman with rimmed eyes clutching her page like it had thorns. I thought I was the only one, she said. Grace knelt beside her, wordless, a hand on the woman's shoulder. That touch said everything our years of missed conversations never had. The room didn't fill with comfort. It filled with truth. Afterwards, we gathered the chairs into a circle. No podiums, no hierarchy, just human stories with broken spines now being stitched by acknowledgement. I watched Grace speak to a man about his wife's Alzheimer's, saw her nod with that tilt I knew by heart. The one that meant she wasn't just hearing, but absorbing. That nod used to be mine. Maybe it could be again. Later, as we packed up spiral-bound notebooks and leftover cake, I noticed something. The mug was empty, but someone had placed a small yellow rose inside it. On our drive home, Grace didn't talk. She just turned on the radio. A song from 1980 played our wedding year. I looked at her hands on the steering wheel. Same rings, same curve in her pinky from when she broke it learning to roller skate. She hadn't taken off her ring this time. I hadn't stopped noticing. That night after dinner, Thursday dinner, which we'd kept every week since I found the little notebook she gave me back in the hospital. The one she labeled for the next 40. I hadn't touched it yet. I opened to the first page. Let's begin with Thursday dinners. They stayed a little while longer. They talked about nothing and everything, mostly beginnings. Mostly the quiet courage of showing up. The mug with the golden crack now sits on our kitchen shelf, not hidden, not displayed, just present, like us. Sometimes the loudest repair comes in the quietest room. Grace and I never had one perfect sentence, but we learned how to underline the ones that mattered. People think stories end with closure. Maybe they really begin with noticing. Has life ever handed you a second chance in disguise? Tell me your story below, or share it with someone across the dinner table tonight.